Oh, and thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much, honestly, for writing this article that we have out here that we will link, of course, for the audience in the podcast description, the YouTube description. But it's kind of giving the ability for people to actually get a look into something that we in the kind of like leftist media circles have been acknowledging and witnessing for a while, the past couple years, which is Glenn Greenwald's shift to the right and pivot towards right wing audiences. But that's sort of like a subjective analysis. You were able to actually get some data into that. So if you could you walk the audience through a little bit of your methodology and kind of the conclusions that led you towards as far as what Glenn Greenwald is doing with his platform and how he's using it, and maybe if there's some, you know, not inaccuracies, but hypocrisies there.
Yeah. So I should say that my methodology is subjective, and I say that in the article. It's totally subjective, but I think it's fair. So what I did was I went through all of his tweets that I could find that mentioned Fox, and that kind of started in September 2016. There's a little bit of a gap in 2017, 2018, where his whole timeline is scrubbed. I don't think there's anything specific that he was going after there. I think he was probably using a tweet deleter, and it just kind of ended up where it ended up. But I separated, or I went through everything, and then, if there were like neutral ones where he was referring to Fox as an incidental or as kind of like a news hit or something like that, I would remove those. And so I just had two categories, just positive and negative. And I'll just read my methodology from the article. So I went through the remainder with an eye to reducing the total number of posts. He was going through a whole back and forth. Where he just said the same thing over and over and over again in the thread. I would just conclude one. And then, there was there's a link that he has used frequently from December 2017, where it's about him criticizing Laura Ingraham to her face. And he has used that repeatedly as evidence that he is an independent minded person. So I kept some. I took some out. Some of them I counted as negative. Some of them I counted as positive, kind of depending on the context. So I divided the remainder. So if a tweet was directly critical of Fox or a Fox personality, or if someone appearing on Fox, there weren't any of those, but if there were, or if he used a negative comparison of Fox with another network to make that network look good, there were also none of those, but it would be negative. If a tweet was directly positive about Fox, about someone appearing on Fox in defense of Greenwald's appearances on Fox, or used a positive comparison of Fox with another liberal network, I listed as positive. I also listed him promoting his appearances as positive because I felt that those were directly reflecting positively on Fox, like the way that he was presenting it. So I was left with 193 tweets, 33 of them negative, 160 positive. And so the first thing I did was I just graphed them out, and I found that negatives spiked in 2016 and positives started spiking in 2020 and just really, really ramping up in 2021. I then cross-checked those with his appearances, and surprise, surprise, the more appearances that he had, the more positive that he tweeted. And since he has been regularly appearing on Fox since late last year, about a year ago now, actually, maybe October 2020, it's been universally positive. In fact, I've only found two negative ones since April 30th, 2020. And both of those were on the same day. I believe it was May 19, 2021, where he talks about Fox's coverage of Israel, which is, of course, terrible, and he's correct to criticize them for that. But otherwise, it's been universally positive. I mean, it's included things like him celebrating the Fox ratings as being really, really high compared to MSNBC and CNN, which is an interesting thing to just celebrate as an independent voice. I've also there's he's like promoted other people's appearances, like, hey, you should watch Fox right now while such and such is on there, which is like the kind of behavior that you do when you're trying to get a job. That was back in April 2021. Since then, of course, he has joined Rumble and Callin, which are part of the kind of general Thiel VC independent right-wing media world. But before that, it looked like, my interpretation, what it looked like is that he was trying to get a job with Fox. But nevertheless, I mean, it's just been almost universally positive, and yeah, so that's what I found.
Yeah, and folks should check out your work at owenhiggins.substack.com. Of course, we'll spell that out and have that in the description, because your work covers just a lot of great details. And we're gonna like kind of talk about the dynamics of independent media a little bit in a moment. But basically, you created definitions for what is positive, conversation of Glenn Greenwald about Fox News. You create a definition for what counts as negative. You create a timeline, you created some graphs, and what it sort of leads you to say is that Glenn Greenwald, in angling to expand his audience through Fox News, did a lot more, positive promotion of himself going on the network, of others going on the network, of ratings, which it's the dumbest pissing contest ever, because the amount of people who watch Fox News relative to the amount of people in the United States is just insanely small. And so it's always kind of damning with faint praise. Like, okay, you have this many like politically like really intense right wingers who are like watching Fox News in the background while they're getting mad at something else. Like, good for you, I guess, Glenn. But nevertheless, I think it's really important to get this, because it's not just like Fox News appearances. That's not just the only hypocritical thing, even though I was able to find a tweet from like 2019 of Glenn Greenwald. It seems like non-sarcastically going after one of the Pod Save America guys, Tommy Vitor, saying that, hey, if you're upset at like, why weren't you upset about Obama and Hillary Clinton going on Bill O'Reilly and Fox News if that's like a big issue for you? So he seemed to be like pointing out this hypocrisy and being at least able to see this when it was when it was criticizing liberals and the left. But again, because criticizing liberals and the left is kind of only his brand, it's only his message, it's a lot of what the right wing is doing right now, of being the boys who cried cancel culture, essentially. It's all they have, and Glenn Greenwald knows how effective it is to build an audience. And so, and it's been effective for him. He has also been on Substack. He's been able to build his follower count extremely as a result of it since leaving The Intercept. And this isn't like a big jealousy here. This is kind of saying, why is it that when you have to grow with your audience, even move, it's like the audience is leading the journalist in this sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I included that in the 2019 as one of the positives. I believe that was actually specifically about Bernie going on, though. I mean, the thing is that especially since January 2021, I mean, it has been exclusively a full-throated defense of Fox. Far more than just calling out the hypocrisy of people like the Pod Save guys or other liberals who are being less than honest about like what's going on here. I mean, how you interpret what he is doing, I suppose, in a lot of ways depends on what you think about what his motivations are. I find it hard to look at this data and this information and not see this as it's hard for me to look at, sorry, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts here. It's hard for me to look at this and see what he's doing here as divided from his self-interest and divided from what he wants to accomplish as far as his own personal interests. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate he has been defending Fox for a long time, and whether or not that's a positive or a negative is up to you. I mean, but I think that if you look at his stuff over the last year, it's even if you think that it's defensible to kind of defend Fox and going on Fox in a principled way, what he's been doing this year is pretty sycophantic, and so it is different, I think.
Yeah, to be clear, the tweet I was referring to appears to be kind of in defense of Tulsi Gabbard even, and I can like send it to you really fast, so like you know what I'm talking about. But essentially, and it would have been in line with a lot of what people on certain parts of the left were doing at this time, which was like pointing out criticisms of um you know, basically inconsistencies and criticisms of Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, even to some extent Elizabeth Warren, versus other more mainstream progressive or like liberal Democratic candidates at the time. And this had to go around with the idea of going on Fox News interviews and like all on Fox News for interviews. And I think all cards on the table, if you're a candidate running for office, you need to go do media appearances. And if you can use your media platform intelligently, knowing like when Bernie Sanders did that town hall on Fox News in 2020, knowing that he was going kind of in the bullpen, he was able to flip the talking points that we all knew he was going to get, like what Medicare for all cost this much money and people aren't interested in big government socialism. And that ended with the crowd that Fox News gathered in Pennsylvania, whatever, cheering for Bernie Sanders. All right, there's a way where you can use the platform that Fox News is giving you to nudge and convince that audience, hey, some of the things that progressives are fighting for isn't like it's not that scary. The ways that the right wing fear mongers about it doesn't hold a lot of merit. Nevertheless, all the people who seem to be making this argument, besides, you know, myself and maybe others who are like more principled in this, folks like Jimmy Dore, folks like Glenn Greenwald, who are going on Fox News very often, aren't really that often speaking to they aren't I'm not seeing a lot of the shoehorning in progressive ideas or making the case for progressive ideology. I'm seeing a lot of, yes, all of the things you believe, all of the fears you already have are correct, and by the way, check out my spin on independent media because I will continue to confirm those fears and assumptions about the world that you see that you're constantly fed on outlets like Fox News. It seems to me like it's like I guess like a bait and switch sort of, where they're saying that they're going on Fox News to spread their ideology and to reach a new audience. But in reality, they're using that new audience to tell them what they want to hear, which is what Fox News does best, and then using that to make their own money. But I'm not seeing any like left connection here. Is this something that, as we've broadened it out from this sort of like Fox News perspective and more into Glenn Greenwald's sycophantic like behaviors you were kind of alluding to, does that kind of tack with what you've been seeing, in that Glenn Greenwald is more motivated in telling his audience what he wants to hear and guiding his audience, which is increasingly more right-leaning and sycophantic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a strong argument to be made that Greenwald is doing what he's doing from a purely out of pure self-interest, and so that he maybe doesn't even believe all the stuff that he's saying about how great Fox is and about, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, he has become just a right-wing partisan at this point. So at what point do his motivations no longer matter, I think, is a valid question to ask. I mean, I think as far as he and Jimmy Dore and other right-wing figures that have some cachet on the left, as far as they go, they are. It's interesting because they're presenting themselves and their perspective as independent and unique and kind of like they're presenting themselves as kind of part of like a new paradigm where they're challenging things from like top bottom and inequality and like the like it's not about left and right, it's about like who's on top and who's not. Um and I think that there's like a limited utility to that, but ultimately if you're advocating for an alliance with the right wing, you are advocating for an alliance with people who adhere to an ideology that it's very clear like what the final goal is here, and that's not one that ends with a multiracial working class with where people have all of their different identity interests are all kind of combined together into their push for equality and justice. That's not the right wing's final or even intermediate goal. And so, for people like Jimmy and Glenn, and their other kind of lesser hangers on, what they are presenting is a view that ends up tilting to the right, because the more that you kind of ignore those aspects of the political reality, the easier it is for the right wing to continue to gain power and to kind of make its way into these left spaces. And I would also say that, if you're going to say that you're a part of independent media and that you're, telling people the truth and doing something different, which, like, look, Glenn and Jimmy, they make their money from their audience and their supporters, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, let's not pretend that means that that the ideology that they're representing and the positions that they are taking are somehow like contrary to the interests of the people who are really in power. I mean, the stuff that they say is almost all perfectly in line with a certain stripe of far right billionaire VC capital investor money, and we would be kidding ourselves to pretend that what they're doing is really challenging power in any meaningful way.
I agree with that 100%. And I think you can even look at, I think on YouTube it's easier to see because you can just look at videos in chronological order. And other shows, The Majority Report, Sam Cedar, Emma Vigeland, and a number of others have done this as well, where they just look at the video history of Jimmy Dore and they see, um, at a certain point, you notice that the views sort of dip down because Jimmy, like the force the vote stuff that Jimmy Dore is like talking about over the course of 2021 is sort of fizzling out. And so Jimmy starts doing more videos about COVID vaccine and denialism and skepticism and all those other things. And then all of a sudden he's making in more views. And so his channel is more flooded by that. And so I think it's very interesting that, yeah, like you're saying, ultimately, these people who call themselves counterculture and independent media are people who are ultimately end up parroting, like they end up going in the free market of ideas, but the free market of ideas always leads you to the hunt for money, and that hunt for money usually leads you to right-wing millionaire and billionaire venture capital, like you were saying. And it also kind of leads you, yeah, more towards right-wing extremism. Like, I think one of the more interesting points was made by Evan Hill, who works at the New York Times, who tweeted out of the blue, kind of. Often when people who aren't that smart run out of things to say, they put themselves in proximity to vulgar, horrific, or insane people, hoping that anything will rub off and get the last gawkers to stop and take a whiff. Anyways, here's the last screenshot of on my phone, and you see the Red Scare girls posing with Alex Jones, who's recently just been basically charged with having to be responsible for a lot of the legal fees for the Sandy Hook parents, because and a lot just like damages in general because of his spreading of misinformation there. Like, there's no a lot like he was deplatformed from a number of different websites because it was barely a left or right wing issue. You're like saying that these people who are like very real and existed in this moment are like part of a false flag operation. Um, it these people who claim to be counterculture, they claim to be part of like some sort of like against the media movement, but oftentimes it's just for shock value or to try to become part of the conversation yourself with your opinion, as opposed to doing like proper types of journalism. It's almost like a provocation journalism that we saw with, I mean, if you want to use the quotes journalism term loosely, we saw with Milo Yiannopoulos early in the 2010s, trying to find ways to provoke and create these different events to provoke, that which then turned into the way right wingers went on to college campuses to get viral moments they could put on their YouTube channels of liberals getting triggered. It seems to me that part of independent media has unfortunately become a circus where you have some folks like yourself, myself, a lot of others that we know who are trying to do things in a serious manner, who believe there's like a service to be done to their audiences. And then there are others who are part of Grift Nation. And so I kind of wonder from your perspective, how do you approach the idea of trust on your end? From like, what do you expect? How do you expect to how do you expect to get your audience to trust you? To what extent do you expect your audience to be looking out for these kind of things from a media literacy kind of sense? To what perspective, or like to what extent do you think that it's up to hosts to teach, or like, you know, writers, people like that, to teach their audience media literacy? I want to get your thoughts on this because like you're someone I really respect who's going at it in independent media, and these are questions I'm thinking about all the time. And so I want to know like what you kind of get on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a couple of things to say. I mean, that's kind of a big question. I think I would go back and I would say, I don't really talk about Red Scare very often. And I don't really have a lot to say about them. I think that Mr. Hill's tweet seems correct to me. Honestly, I just think that knowing what Jones did to those families, whose like tiny children were like torn apart, is just not something that. I mean, even Greenwald was like, "Oh yeah, he's prohibited. He's too dangerous," very sarcastically, and it's like, I mean, what would you say if one of your children was gunned down and people were saying that it was a conspiracy theory and harassing? I mean, it's just such a level of inhumanity that I'm not really interested in this kind of joking response to it that a lot of these kind of contrarian right wingers have, including Glenn. And I think that his follow up that people interviewed Osama bin Laden after 9/11 is like, okay, yeah, but like it's kind of the same thing. Like, yeah, this wasn't a challenging interview. Like they just like went and hung out with him and shot guns. I mean, it's like the same thing as him posting a Noam Chomsky quote saying he doesn't write anything about Fox News because what's the point? Like, Glenn, you do write things about Fox News. You just write positive things. And that is the issue. But anyway, that's a bit of a digression. I think as far as independent media goes, I didn't come to this through any traditional path. I don't have any professional, or I don't have any academic training in journalism. I answered an ad to do some clerical work and ended up getting made a reporter to fill a gap at a weekly local paper that I then flipped into working for a daily local paper, and then flipped into being an independent freelancer. I mean, I think that because so much of my work has been independent freelance journalism, and because I take a specific approach to the career, which is to just I don't know, I'm trying not to like talk myself up really here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that my approach to journalism is to challenge power and to ask questions, ask difficult questions, and also because of my core belief in leftist politics, I also feel very strongly about making sure that people who I believe are misrepresenting themselves and taking advantage of people on the left, like Thor, like Greenwald, should be challenged on that and should be called out on it. As far as like how to build trust, I mean, I think I have built some trust with my work, but I think that unfortunately, one thing that right-wing media, right-wing independent media, and right-wing corporate media, and the line between the two is obviously blurring a lot. But one thing that they are really, really good at is promoting each other. And it really helps if you are a journalist like Glenn Greenwald, who, so you're probably one of the most famous journalists on the planet. For good reason, for his NSA reporting alone. I mean, changed the world for the better. There's no question about that. But he already has a huge platform. He goes on to Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson promotes his Substack. He gets more followers on social media and more subscribers to his Substack that then he kind of disseminates to other right-wing provocateurs. Who I'm not going to mention by name because I don't think that they're worth that attention. But I think that anybody who knows what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. And then it just kind of becomes this snowball of media. I mean, I would say that, there like even people like Barry Weiss, who Greenwald used to criticize, but because now they are both Substack and because they are both outwardly conservative partisans at this point, are now working with one another to build up each other's audience. And so there's this sense of that happening. And I think on the left, I don't know if it's because there's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of infighting on the right too, but they do have a certain message discipline when it comes to making sure that the general message of the right wing is getting out there, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Glenn Greenwald or Barry Weiss or Matt Taibbi or any of these like new right characters, again, whether or not they're the extreme racist right like Carlson or this kind of like faux lefty stuff like Dor and Greenwald and Taibbi, or kind of this more mainstream kind of neocon stuff like Weiss. It doesn't matter. It's all this one thing that they're pushing forward. And I think that on the left, it is hard to kind of coalesce together because, first of all, we don't have a large corporate media backer like Fox News to help us. Like, what do people on the left have for cable news? What else is there besides Fox? There's MSNBC and CNN. These are two networks that are incredibly hostile to anything to the left of like Abigail Spanberger. There's no corresponding mainstream media, no corresponding corporate conglomerate that can provide independent left voices with the same kind of platform and attention that Fox can for right-wing journalists like Greenwald. And so I don't really know where I'm going with that other than to just kind of say that in order to build trust and to build audiences, I think that independent left media, I think that there's an opportunity here. I think that there are people, from Twitch to Substack to Twitter to The Intercept to other left media. And the thing is that, as I'm saying this, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, well, I have a problem with this or that or this, it's like, that's totally fine. But the general message of that independent left media is the same in the same way that the right wing media is that I'm talking about. So we need to find a way that we can all push our stuff together and make sure that everybody is able to get these messages out. And because I think that ultimately our goal should really be to find a way to affect positive left social change. And in order to do that, we need to have a strong messaging department, and whether or not that's like objective journalism or opinion or whatever. But I think that all that stuff has to be like seen together and all kind of part of the same sphere. And it feels like we're all there, but it's just disconnected.
As I've asked this question in a number of different versions in a number of different ways to a lot of other people before, and I think you just tied a lot of different pieces together in a way that I think was just really eloquent, that I just want to like echo and highlight, because the right wing has all of these like infrastructures that they say are their own media institutions. They have their own think tanks, they have their own non-for-profits, they have any of these other like different organizations and things like that. But they have their news networks, and they actually do coordinate kind of to some extent. Like there isn't like exactly an email thread or whatever, but oftentimes there is. Sometimes we do actually catch the talking points. But usually it's basically just an understanding of, oh, we see what everyone else is talking about. Let's continue that. Let's hammer it home. Let's make it the thing that Democrats have to respond to because no one else is talking about it. And I think that the left can learn from that sort of group mentality. I think the left, kind of by the nature of how it exists, wants to do things in kind of like a, I guess disjointed is the wrong word, but like autonomous, I guess is a good word. They want to do things on their own way, their own measure, to make sure that the broad things are being covered, because there are more than just one or two news stories. The right wing can freak out about Dr. Seuss for a week, while the left will actually be talking about poverty, hunger, class issues, racial justice issues, gender justice issues, like the whole gamut. It's just like sort of a different game we're playing, but I still also believe that we do have all the pieces. We have the knowledge, we have the talent, we have the shows, we have the infrastructure there in place, but we don't coordinate enough. But I think that's something that independent media can sort of take the initiative to do, because we are kind of making the rules. I also have no traditional journalism background. I've done journalism at different points in my past where I've like learned the ropes very quickly, and I have a sense of ethics. I feel like the more transparent I am with my audience and how I arrive to my conclusions, that is its own sort of building of trust, because you can see how I do that myself. But all in all, I think those things are really good. We have to kind of, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, we have to meet our audiences halfway, where there's so much media out there, and a lot of it's going to just feed to their opinions, their emotions very cheaply. But the best thing to do is to offer that trust and say where you're coming from. Like, we have this perspective, we come from the left, but you should trust us because this is where we're getting our facts from. This is how we're building our evidence, etc. And I think that's something you're doing as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that that I do is I work with Discourse Blog, which is like Splinter, with basically having the Splinter after that. We do some like just article sharing back and forth. I work with Discontents, which is a collection of lefty newsletters, and we all just kind of promote each other's work. A few of them are trying to do kind of bundled newsletters. We're going to see how that kind of works out. Like, there are different things that are happening, and I think that there's a growing need for video commentary, like you do, and like a number of other people do, to kind of push back against again, like right-wing YouTubers like Dor and others. It does feel like it's kind of a moment in time where there are just a huge number of left independent media ventures that are going on, And it really is important that we find a way to combine somehow our messaging. Because again, like I said, I mean, the important, and I hate to go back to this and harp on it, but I am going to anyway. What is really important here is that we do not have any kind of mainstream backers. We don't have corporate cable news on our side. So we need to figure out like a different way to do that. We need to there's any number of like corny ways to say this, right? We need to innovate. We need to think outside the box, blah, 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 whatever. But like, but what it really is that we all need to like kind of work together here to try and figure out some kind of a different model. I would say as well that like there's opt out, which I'm also a part of, which is like a kind of a new way of collecting all of these independent media together. And it's an app where you can kind of scroll down and all the articles come up in a feed. And I think that seems really promising to me as well. I guess what I'm saying is that there are a lot of different moving pieces that are going on, and we just really need someone or someones to just kind of get everybody to come together and kind of have a more clear messaging. And I feel like that's happening on different levels, but it does seem like we need to have some sort of, maybe we need to have a symposium or something like that. But that's probably a little silly. But really the thing is that the opportunity is here, so we need to take it.
No, I think you're on the right track. I think we solve this with one big Twitter Spaces on the left. That's going to be incredibly productive. No one will argue at all, and
Right.
it'll all be over in a brisk 96 hours. So, speaking of brisk 96 hours, thank you so much for taking the time out for speaking to me on these these really heady, important issues for our audience. Again, what lets folks know where they can find you?
Yeah. My Substack, which is EOINHIGGINS.substack.com. Follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/EOINHIGGINS_ anything that I don't do on my newsletter, which is a bunch of other stuff, is on there. But those are the two places where you can find my work.
And there's truly a collection, I'm speaking to the audience, there's truly a collection of really great like leftist Substacks out there. And I'll continue talking about the show, definitely in my rotation. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for the work you do.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me.